Um, yeah, so Ernie's going to go through some material, really, I guess on Plato we'll start with.
Yeah, it's going to be Plato.
Yeah, but, so, I mean, because one of the things that Ernie is working on is this whole idea of what do the forms that, you know, that are referred to in Plato, these kind of paradigmatic ideas, or however you want to look at it, that's the problem, to understand what this is. And of course, Lynn has very much based himself, but also developed these ideas. What is really causality in the universe, and so forth. So I thought I'd read something interesting from a book by a guy, what's his name, Richard T. Arthur. Yeah. Which is just entitled Leibniz. It's quite recent. It came out in the last year, I think. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. I'm not advocating or not advocating. I think this is interesting because what he does is he wants to compare. You know, he says that Leibniz has a mechanical approach to even organisms, but not quite. It's not like, and he tries to compare it to biology today, where the DNA is like a program. It has a structure to it, and it unfolds in the development of the creature, the species, or the individual member of the species. So he says, of course, there are many salient differences between Leibniz's views and modern biology. While the notion of a program regulating the development and structure of an organism, and even the idea of subprograms regulating structures and developments of organisms within the body of the original organism, are common to both, Leibniz's natural machines are characterized by a nested structure that is both structurally and functionally infinite, in contrast to the finite nestedness of bodies assumed by modern biology, and indeed the finiteness of the information encoded in them. So he at least sees that, he's made this analogy between Leibniz and modern biology and a kind of DNA software program, but then he says there's a difference. In Leibniz, he calls it the infinite. I would say it's something a little different, but it's interesting. Again, for Leibniz, living creatures are all created by God in creation and remain self-identical through all their changes of outward form until the end of the world, in obvious contrast to the finitude of life assumed in modern evolutionary biology. Finally, the internal laws containing the genetic information of Leibnizian individuals evidently do not evolve by natural selection, but simply unfold this information on the occasions of changes in their environments. That is, he's basically saying there's a driving force behind evolution, not just some, adjustment to the limited circumstances. Nevertheless, all Leibniz's natural machines are interconnected, despite their lack of substantial interconnection, and in this way can be said to constitute one interwoven machine, the created universe. Right? Proposing this all-encompassing mechanism is deliberate on Leibniz's part, since it supports divine providence. The machines of nature, divine machines, are designed by God to contribute to the overall perfection of the universe, which they do individually, yet in complete harmony, without needing to be steered by a soul acting on them. So what you realize is that this guy's whole description of this is not, he's basically saying Leibniz is not a mechanist. Right. He has a whole different conception, which really subsumes the idea of having an unfolding of an idea. And in a funny way, he concludes, as our understanding of the cosmos progresses in astrobiology, we may come to see that Leibniz's vision of matter as fundamentally made up of self-sustaining, replicating machines is not so very far from the truth. Now, if you just substituted replicating machines and said astrobiology may teach us that Leibniz's conception of a living creative universe is the reality. And I think that's part of the reason I wanted to bring it up is because Ernie's working on this idea of what does it mean to talk about substantial forms or guiding principles and so forth really is at the core of this historic battle, shall we say, between the Platonic approach and the Aristotelian approach. So this harks back to the document that people used to read, Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, which was a campaigner from 1978, which, you know, basically made the point that this is the fundamental dividing line in Western civilization. Plato, Aristotle, you know, in a certain sense, that's the whole issue. Now, it may have developed an awful lot over 2,500 years, and we may know more, but in many ways, it's the same difference. So.
Okay. Well, how many people have read The Republic? Okay.
Many years.
Really, everybody. Yeah. Okay. Well, what would you say? What would you say would be the central theme of it, or one of the main central themes?
What is justice? The question of justice, isn't that
Okay.
something that's
What is virtue?
I mean, how to create virtuous people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
also the obvious, I mean, it's the question of a government, I mean, what's an appropriate way of governing human beings?
Uh-huh. Okay. I'm not saying the right answer, I'm just, you know, people thinking, you know, provoke some discussion before, you know, we actually get into it.
I mean, he also, as I recall, it's a long time, takes up the question of what is the nature of the soul and what is the nature of mind, and what is the nature of hypothesis. What does the mind do? What's the action? What is the action of the mind?
What about this thing about the guardians? Does that provoke what people think of? People remember the term, right? The guardians? Who are these people and what?
Oh yeah, you give all your children over to the guardians, right? Isn't that what they said, that they raised all the children communally by
I think so. I have to admit, I haven't read it in a long time. I've read certain sections relevant to what we're talking about today. So I saw that there's communal raising of the children. So I can't say much about that. But the guardians are specific people that have to be developed. So I think this is I'm going to hone in on that. The question is, how are the leaders who have to be trained in philosophy to think on the highest level, how do you manage to create such people from where you're starting from? And so I think that's really his. So I sort of think about that, you know, in terms of how that relates to Lynn. I mean, think of the influence of Plato, and historically, I mean, would there have been Christianity without Plato? Okay, for one thing. And it's the kind of question, would there be the bricks today without Lynn? So these are the order of questions that we're raising. What kind of knowledge would you need and answer both those questions? Not is it true, but what kind of knowledge would you need? It's like this paper he wrote on the subject of God. He says, he's responding to this guy Dawkins, I mentioned it last week. He's saying, what kind of knowledge would you need in order to answer the question of the existence of God? So I think that's totally, Plato, I mean, I think totally extraordinary figure. So I wanted to, I think, I didn't give out any papers from here, this Lynn's discovery paper this week, because we're really picking up where we left off, in a sense. There's just one paragraph I'll just read. The founding work of modern science is Nicholas of Cusa's De Docta Ignorantia, in which the pivotal mathematical discovery reference is Nicholas' revolutionary treatment of Archimedes' theorems on quadrature of the circle. Nicholas' new solution for these theorems is also a form of demonstration of the general solution for the ontological paradox depicted within Plato's Parmenides dialogue. Nicholas' discovery is, in fact, an illustration of Plato's principle of human knowledge, hypothesizing the higher hypothesis. And then he has a reference here, which is what we're going to read, and I thought we'd do Parmenides you know, Parmenides, next time. It's a little tricky. He says, see the celebrated image of the divided line in Plato's Republic. And that's, we want to basically go through this metaphor of the divided line. So we could start with the first page. Let's see, I think it's 741.
This is from Plato's Republic, you're saying?
Yeah, could you make it bigger? I can make it bigger.
Oh, I think
So he's Glaucon is asking Plato or Socrates, what should be the study of those who are going to be qualified to lead? I left out a paragraph, so I'll just start and read it myself, and then we'll go on to that. Okay. So Socrates says, but furthermore, you know this too, that the multitude believe pleasure to be good, and the finer spirits intelligence or knowledge. Certainly. And you are also aware, my friend, that those who hold this latter view are not able to point out what knowledge it is, but are finally compelled to say that it is the knowledge of the good. Most absurdly, he said. Is it not absurd, said I, if while taunting us with our ignorance of good, they turn about and talk to us as if we knew it? For they say it is the knowledge of the good, as if we understood their meaning when they utter the word good. Most true, he said. Well, are those who define the good as pleasure infected with any less confusion of thought than the others? Or are not they in like manner compelled to admit that there are bad pleasures? Most assuredly. The outcome is, I take it, that they are admitting the same things to be both good and bad, are they not? Certainly. Then is it not apparent that there are many and violent disputes about it? Of course. Okay, we can restart here. Now, let's see, we actually have you have a dialogue, so maybe two people could read, you know, and leave out the he said, you know, each time it'll say he said, so you have volunteer for.
I can be Glaucon. Is it Glaucon is doing the little answers? I'll do the short answers.
Okay.
John, you should do the long one since you're right in front there, you can see the best.
And again, it is not apparent, is it not apparent that while in the case of the just and the honorable, many would prefer the semblance without the reality in action, possession, and opinion, yet when it comes to the good, nobody is content with the possession of the appearance, but all men seek the reality. And the semblance satisfies nobody here.
Quite so.
That then, which every soul pursues, and for its sake does all that it does, with an intuition of its reality, but yet baffled and unable to apprehend its nature adequately, or to attain to any stable belief about it as about other things, and for that reason failing of any possible benefit from other things, in a matter of this quality and moment, can we, I ask you, allow a like blindness and obscurity in those best citizens to whose hands we are to entrust all things?
Least of all.
I fancy, at any rate, that the just and the honorable, if their relation in reference to the good is not known, will not have secured a guardian of much worth in the man thus ignorant, and my surmise is that no one will understand them adequately before he knows this.
You surmise well.
Then our Constitution will have its perfect and definitive organization only when such a guardian who knows these things oversees it.
Necessarily. But you yourself, Socrates, do you think that knowledge is the good, or pleasure, or something else indifferent?
What a man it is. You made it very plain long ago that you would not be satisfied with what others think about it.
Why, it does not seem right to me either, Socrates, to be ready to state the opinions of others, but not one's own when one has occupied himself with the matter so long.
But then, do you think it right to speak as having knowledge about things one does not know?
By no means. As having knowledge, but one ought to be willing to tell us as his opinion what he opines.
Nay, have you not observed that opinions divorced from knowledge are ugly things? The best of them are blind. Or do you think that those who hold some true opinion without intelligence differ appreciably from blind men who go the right way?
They do not differ at all.
Is it then ugly things that you prefer to contemplate things blind and crooked, when you might hear from others what is luminous and fair?
Nay, in heaven's name, Socrates, do not draw back, as it were, at the very goal, for it will content us if you explain the good, even as you set forth the nature of justice, sobriety, and the other virtues.
It will right well content me, my dear fellow, but I fear my powers may fail, and that in my eagerness I may cut a sorry figure and become a laughingstock. Nay, my beloved, let us dismiss for the time being the nature of the good in itself. For to attain to my present surmise of that seems a pitch above the impulse that wings my flight today. But of what seems to be the offspring of the good and most nearly made in its likeness, I am willing to speak if you too wish it, and otherwise to let the matter drop.
Well, speak on, for you will duly pay me the tale of the parent another time.
I could wish that I were able to make and you to receive the payment, and not merely as now the interest, but at any rate receive this interest and the offspring of the good. Have a care, however, lest I deceive you unintentionally with a false reckoning of the interest.
We will do our best to be on our guard. Only speak on.
Yes, after first coming to an understanding with you and reminding you of what has been said here before and often on other occasions.
What?
We predicate to be of many beautiful things and many good things, saying of them severally that they are, and so define them in our speech.
We do.
And again, we speak of a self-beautiful and of a good that is only and merely good. And so, in the case of all the things that we then posited as many, we turn about and posit each as a single idea or aspect, assuming it to be a unity, and call it that which each really is.
It is so.
And the one class of things we say can be seen but not thought, while the ideas can be thought but not seen.
By all means.
With which of the parts of ourselves, with which of our faculties then, do we see visible things?
With sight.
And do we not hear audibles with hearing, and perceive all sensibles with the other senses?
Surely.
Have you ever observed how much the greatest expenditure the creator of the senses has lavished on the faculty of seeing and being seen?
Why, no, I have not.
Well, look at it thus. Do hearing and voice stand in need of another medium, so that the one may hear and the other be heard, in the absence of which third element the one will not hear and the other not be heard?
They need nothing.
Neither, I fancy, do many others, not to say that none require anything of the sort. Or do you know of any?
Not I.
But do you not observe that vision and the visible do have this further need?
How?
Though vision may be in the eyes and its possessor may try to use it, and though color be present, yet without the presence of a third thing, specifically and naturally adapted to this purpose, you are aware that vision will see nothing, and the colors will remain invisible.
What is this thing of which you speak?
The thing that you call light.
You say truly.
The bond, then, that yokes together visibility and the faculty of sight is more precious by no slight form than that which unites the other pairs, if light is not without ornament.
It surely is far from being so.
Which one can you name of the divinities in heaven as the author and cause of this, whose light makes our vision see best and visible things to be seen?
Why, the one that you, too, and other people mean, for your question evidently refers to the sun.
Is not this, then, the relation of vision to that divinity?
What?
Neither vision itself nor its vehicle, which we call the eye, is identical with the sun.
Why, no.
But it is, I think, the most sun-like of all the instruments of sense.
By far the most.
And does it not receive the power which it possesses as an influx, as it were, dispensed from the sun?
Certainly.
Is it not also true that the sun is not vision, yet as being the cause thereof is beheld by vision itself?
That is so.
This then you must understand, that I meant by the offspring of the good which the good begot, to stand in a proportion with itself. As the good is in the intelligible region to reason and the objects of reason, so it is in the visible world to vision and the objects of vision.
How is that? Explain further.
You are aware that when the eyes are no longer turned upon objects upon whose colors the light of day falls, but that of the dim luminaries of night, their edge is blunted, and they appear almost blind, as if pure vision did not dwell in them.
Yes, indeed.
But when I take it, they are directed upon objects illumined by the sun, they see clearly, and vision appears to reside in these same eyes.
Certainly.
Apply this comparison to the soul also in this way. When it is firmly fixed on the domain where truth and reality shine resplendent, it apprehends and knows them and appears to possess reason. But when it inclines to that region which is mingled with darkness, the world of becoming and passing away, it opines only, and its edge is blunted. And it shifts its opinions hither and thither, and again seems as if it lacked reason.
Yes, it does.
This reality, then, that gives their truth to the objects of knowledge, and the power of knowing to the knower, you must say is the idea of good, and you must conceive it as being the cause of knowledge and of truth insofar as known. Yet fair as they both are, knowledge and truth, and supposing it to be something fairer still than these, you will think rightly of it. Does that make sense?
Something fairer still than these.
Yet fair as they both are, knowledge and truth, and supposing it to be something fairer still than these, you will think.
Than these, knowledge and truth.
Oh, I see. Something fairer still than these, you will think rightly of it. But as for knowledge and truth, even as in our illustration it is right to deem light and vision sunlight, but never to think that they are the sun. So here it is right to consider these two, their counterparts, as being like the good or boniform, but to think that either of them is the good is not right. Still higher honor belongs to the possession and habit of the good.
An inconceivable beauty you speak of, if it is the source of knowledge and truth, and yet itself surpasses them in beauty, for you surely cannot mean that it is pleasure.
Hush, but examine the similitude of it still further in this way.
How?
The sun, I presume you will say, not only furnishes to visibles the power of visibility, but it also provides for their generation and growth and nurture, though it is not itself generation.
Of course not.
In like manner, then, you are to say that the objects of knowledge not only receive from the presence of the good their being known, but their very existence and essence is derived to them from it, though the good itself is not essence, but still transcends essence in dignity and surpassing power.
Heaven save us, hyperbole can no further go.
The fault is yours for compelling me to utter my thoughts about it.
And don't desist, but at least expound the similitude of the sun, if there is anything that you are omitting.
Why, certainly I am omitting a great deal.
Well, don't omit the least bit.
I fancy that I shall have to pass over much, but nevertheless, so far as it is present, practicable, it is at present practicable, I shall not willingly leave anything out.
Do not.
Conceive then, as we were saying, that there are these two entities, and that one of them is sovereign over the intelligible order and region, and the other over the world of the eyeball, not to say the sky ball, but let that pass. You surely apprehend the two types, the visible and the intelligible.
I do.
Represent them, then, as it were, by a line divided into two unequal sections, and cut each section again in the same ratio, the ratio, that is, of the visible and that of the intelligible order. And then, as an expression of the ratio of their comparative clearness and obscurity, you will have, as one of the sections of the visible world, images. By images I mean first shadows, and then reflections in water and on surfaces of dense, smooth, and bright texture, and everything of that kind, if you apprehend.
I do.
As the second section, assume that of which this is a likeness or an image, that is, the animals about us and all plants, and the whole class of objects made by man.
I so assume it.
Would you be willing to say that the division in respect of reality and truth, or the opposite, is expressed by the proportion, as is the opinable to the knowable, so is the likeness to that of which it is a likeness?
I certainly would.
Consider then, again, the way in which we are to make the division of the intelligible section.
In what way?
By the distinction that there is one section of it which the soul is compelled to investigate by treating as images the things imitated in the former division, and by means of assumptions from which it proceeds not up to a first principle but down to a conclusion, while there is another section in which it advances from its assumption to a beginning or principle that transcends assumption, and in which it makes no use of the images employed by the other section, relying on ideas only and progressing systematically through ideas.
I don't fully understand what you mean by this.
Well, I will try again, for you will better understand after this preamble. For I think you are aware that students of geometry and reckoning and such subjects first postulate in the odd and the even, and the various figures and three kinds of angles and other things akin to these in each branch of science, regard them as known, and treating them as absolute assumptions, do not deign to render any further account of them to themselves or others, taking it for granted that they are obvious to everybody. They take their start from these, and pursuing the inquiry from this point on consistently, conclude with that for the investigation of which they set out.
Certainly, I know that.
And do you not also know that they further make use of the visible forms and talk about them, though they are not thinking of them, but of those things of which they are a likeness, pursuing their inquiry for the sake of the square as much as such, pursuing their inquiry for the sake of the square as such, and the diagonal as such, and not for the sake of the image of it which they draw. And so in all cases, the very things which they mold and draw, which have shadows and images of themselves in water, these things they treat in their turn only as images, but what they really seek is to get sight of those realities which can be seen only by the mind.
True.
Does someone else want to take over?
Sure. This then is the class that I described as intelligible. It is true. But with the reservation first that the soul is compelled to employ assumptions in the investigation of it, not proceeding to a first principle because of its inability to extricate itself from and rise above its assumptions. And second, that it uses as images or likenesses the very objects that are themselves copied and adumbrated by the class below them, and that in comparison with these latter are esteemed as clear and held in honor.
I understand that you are speaking of what falls under geometry and the kindred arts.
Understand then that by the other section of the intelligible, I mean that which the reason itself lays hold of by the power of dialectic, treating its assumptions not as absolute beginnings, but literally as hypotheses, underpinnings, footings, and springboards, so to speak, to enable it to rise to that which requires no assumption and is the starting point of all. And after attaining to that, again, taking hold of the first dependencies from it, so to proceed downwards to the conclusion, making no use whatever of any object of sense, but only of pure ideas, moving on through ideas, to ideas, and ending with ideas.
I understand not fully, for it is no slight task that you appear to have in mind. But I do understand that you mean to distinguish the aspect of reality and the intelligible, which is contemplated by the power of dialectic, as something truer and more exact than the object of the so-called arts and sciences, whose assumptions are arbitrary starting points. And though it is true that those who contemplate them are compelled to use their understanding and not their senses, yet because they do not go back to the beginning in the study of them, but start from assumptions, you do not think they possess true intelligence about them, although the things themselves are intelligibles when apprehended in conjunction with a first principle. And I think you call the mental habit of geometers and their like mind, or understanding and not reason, because you regard understanding as something intermediate between opinion and reason.
Your interpretation is quite sufficient. And now, answering to these four sections, assume these four affections occurring in the soul: intellection or reason for the highest, understanding for the second, belief for the third, and for the last, picture, thinking, or conjecture, and arrange them in a proportion, considering that they participate in clearness and precision in the same degree as their objects partake of truth and reality.
I understand. I concur and arrange them as you bid.
Okay, so, people clear on these four things, above and below the line? Maybe I should just put it on the board.
Put it on the board.
Yeah.
Put in the lemonade.
All right.
Hold on, let me just move these.
Got it.
Getting pretty exciting.
I
Okay, so
filled like
here
20
he's
cups of
got
coffee in
shadows.
last week.
Like, you know, shadows of an object cast on water. Then he has the object that casts the shadow. And then he has the form.
Am I blocking it?
What's controversial today, considered very
I wanna see what he's
controversial.
doing.
There's the form of the object. Okay, that's an ideal sort of an entity which is, you'll see also in Timaeus it comes up. Maybe I'll get
Would
to
you
some of it.
explain that again? I don't
The
understand.
what?
All of it, I don't understand.
Okay, remember he says there's a line and you divide it?
Right.
Okay. He says one side of the line, he talks about shadows cast in water, okay? Then he says there's the object which casts the shadow, okay? Then the form which is invisible, but it's an ideal sort of a likeness which the object is a copy of, okay? And then there's the highest domain of, I would say, pure ideas, without images, without any images. That's how I understand it. Okay, images. So this is four. So why did Lynn pick this out? Why did he, why did he refer to that to communicate something about the nature of knowledge? What is there about this, and how would that compare to Lynn's actual view of knowledge? And also what he's saying about opinion versus knowledge. How does that all relate? How does that all tie together?
Well, I know in Kuza, in the third book, he describes reason as being between your intellect and the senses.
Say that
Okay.
again, John, I didn't hear it.
I said Kuza in the third book, he describes reason as being between the pure intellect, which I assume has no images because it's without sense.
Uh-huh.
Reason being between the pure intellect and senses.
Okay.
Sensual perception.
Okay.
So the idea of pure ideas without images, it seems to be the equivalent of what Kuza calls the pure intellect.
Anybody else have? Daniel, you have some idea on that?
Not at the moment.
Okay. That makes sense. Sounds right. My understanding of it. Yeah. See, what strikes me is that it's sort of an ascent in hypothesis or knowledge, or precision, and or truthfulness. Now, see what Lynn does. You'll see that what he does is he takes his idea of knowledge. It's based basically ultimately on physical economy, and the idea is that a series of hypotheses or of new physical principles have been discovered and then put into practice, implementing a improvement in population level, longevity, and so on. And so you have these series of hypotheses that are elaborated over time, which each has its necessary predecessor. So he's looking at things historically and in terms of a sequence of discoveries and ideas of increasing, you could say, power. Could
Well-
Plato do that in his time?
Huh.
Who would he look back to? I don't know that he could. I don't know that he could do that.
It seems like Plato was also attacking axiomatic thinking, because he said, you know, once people make an idea, put forward an idea that is then accepted, then it's no longer questioned,
Yeah.
and that's taken as a given, and then upon which all other assumptions are based.
Okay.
And he said you have to go back to the pure idea to get the, I can't remember exactly how he put it. But the other question is, what was the role of the dialectic that he described in that?
What are you asking?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the questioning of axioms. That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
I mean, dialectic and dialogue, I think, are related. I mean, that's what he's doing in all these
Right.
dialogues, is questioning people's axioms. So I think that's what.
He was attacking that idea of people relying on axioms.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think so.
Now,
So-
did I understand correctly, it says there's a relationship between pure ideas and form,
Yeah.
that is, that ratio is the same ratio as between objects and shadows?
Well, let's go back and look. I don't
That
recall
was
which
confusing.
ratios, he definitely, you're right, he does cite
I
ratios.
didn't
What
get the
is he?
ratio part.
Let me you have to check that. He does introduce the idea of ratios here.
Matt.
Which way?
Oh.
What ratio do you recall him making?
He was talking about
Two lines.
lines, and it sounded like you're projecting from one down to the other. So that you wanna have distances which are proportional from one to the other.
I
And
think
I'm
you said
trying to
that,
remember what it was.
that the proportion between the two areas of the intelligible,
Yeah.
which are not in equal proportion.
Yeah.
And the proportion between object and shadows
Okay.
is congruent.
Mhm.
And then the proportion between the intelligible and the sensible are also in that same proportion.
Right.
Okay. So you're saying 1 at the top is to 3, is 2 is to 4, something like that? What do you actually say?
No, I'm saying
Which
that,
ratio are you setting up?
if shadows is 1,
Yeah.
then 4 is to 3, as 2 is to 1,
Oh, okay.
as the top 2 to the bottom 2.
You're saying that the very top 2 are have a ratio which is somewhat similar to the ratio of the
Of the
bottom
bottom
2.
Right.
Okay.
And also the top section is in relationship to the bottom section, also similarly, I think.
Okay.
You know, I'm just thinking of this Pluto discovery, because there's also gradations, because what we thought we knew about Pluto, you could say, was the shadow.
Mhm.
Then you get this flyby and we get these photographs which disprove everything that we thought we knew.
Okay.
But it's still just a higher order of a shadow. I mean,
Uh-huh.
we don't have more of an understanding, and then you
Yeah.
can compare that to what Kepler knew or hypothesized
Uh-huh.
about the construction of the solar system, of the galactic, which is in a different realm. I mean, a realm of the pure ideas, or Kepler's hypothesis of something existing where the asteroid belt was later
Mhm.
discovered.
Yeah, we'll see a little later, he talking about what are the areas of study for the guardians, and you'll see that Glaucon says, well, you know, astronomy might be good, because you're sort of, he talks about value of astronomy for, you know, for the practical value of it. And then Socrates says, well, wait a minute, that's not really what is important, it's actual, and he describes, well, what do you really want to get out of, how should you be thinking about astronomy so that it has that, you know, it becomes so that it's enlightened by the good. That's right. This good is something that Lynn has written about. It's the hypothesis of the, it's I think a hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, being as opposed to becoming. And this is an idea that I think Cantor also Cantor has. And so this is an idea which has a great, you know, power and durability in Western civilization, probably also in, I would think, in other civilizations, but I don't know much about that. Oh, let's see. Here. So, okay, so after this, then, he's going to get into book 7. He's going to, the core of it is actually how you, what the guardians, how you develop the capability of the guardians, what studies they must engage in. And prior to that, though, he goes through, people remember the story of Plato's cave? Okay. So that's sort of, the Plato's cave is sort of like people who are living below the line. There's a light cast from behind them, you know, shadows of objects, and that's all they can see, and they can't turn their heads. And then he talks about what it's like if somebody from outside goes in there and has a lot of difficulty, first of all, adjusting their vision. But if they would come down into the cave and start blabbing, you know, to the people in the cave about what life is like outside the cave, they might get killed, you know. So, so he's very funny. I mean, he talks about the problem of actually creating people who really are devoted to philosophy, and he goes through all the problems in the society, and then he goes after the sophists. You know, the sophists have given philosophy a very bad name. So, all right. So I'll sort of read a little bit of stuff here, and then there's some things we can go through. So first of all, he's talking about what education should be like, what kind of education. He said, and if this is true, our view of these matters must be this, that education is not in reality what some people proclaim it to be in their professions. What they aver is that they can put true knowledge into a soul that does not possess it, as if they were inserting vision into blind eyes. They do indeed. But our present argument indicates that the true analogy for this indwelling power in the soul and the instrument whereby each of us apprehends it is that of an eye that could not be converted to the light from the darkness, except by turning the whole body. Even so, this organ of knowledge must be turned around from the world of becoming together with the entire soul, like the scene-shifting periactus, I don't know what that is, in the theater, until the soul is able to endure the contemplation of essence and the brightest region of being. And this, we say, is the good, do we not? Yes. Okay. Of this very thing, then, I said, there might be an art of the speediest and most effective shifting or conversion of the soul. Not an art of producing vision in it, but on the assumption that it possesses vision, but does not rightly direct it, and does not look where it should. An art of bringing this about. Yes, that seems likely, he said. Then the other so-called virtues of the soul do seem akin to those of the body. For it is true that where they do not pre-exist, they are afterward created by habit and practice. But the excellence of thought, it seems, is certainly of a more divine quality, a thing that never loses its potency, but according to the direction of its conversion becomes useful and beneficent, or again useless and harmful. So habit, things you learn by habit are not relevant to the good. Acquiring that capability that is uniquely required. Okay.
I like this expression, until the soul can, I don't know if it's the translation, but it says until the soul can endure contemplation of essence.
Yeah, well, he talks about people who are different types of characters, and he talks about people who are very good who might be very, good in warfare. But he said these people, like, if you try to get them think about something really deep, they'll probably fall asleep. They'll probably start yawning and falling asleep. He says that. So he said you need people who are more sober types, or, who are willing to stick with it, stick with an idea,
Not the jocks.
Yeah. So it's in here, next. What then, Glaucon, would be the study that would draw the soul away from the world of becoming to the world of being? A thought strikes me while I speak. Did we not say that these men in youth must be athletes of war? We did. Then the study for which we are seeking must have this additional qualification. What one? That it be not useless to soldiers. Why, yes, it must be if that is possible. But in our previous account, they were educated in gymnastics and music. They were, and gymnastics, I take it, is devoted to that which grows and perishes, for it presides over the growth and decay of the body. Obviously. Then this cannot be the study we seek, no. Is it then music, so far as we have already described it? Nay, that was the counterpart of gymnastics, if you remember. It educated the guardians through habits, imparting by the melody a certain harmony of spirit that is not science, and by the rhythm measuring grace, and also qualities akin to these in the words of tales that are fables, and those that are more nearly true, but include no study that tended to any such good as you are now seeking. Now, Diane shouldn't feel bad, because a little later he's going to talk about music, the right way to approach music, so that it qualifies for directing people toward the
Just a
good.
mnemonic device for.
For gymnastics. I was thinking maybe we should add physical movement to the curriculum class. Yeah.
All right, so then.
Now you're freaking
I'm
me
gonna
out.
say,
Then he said, okay. Then he says, the experiences that do not provoke thought are those that do not at the same time issue in a contradictory perception. So he's saying that, first of all, for a study to qualify, it's got to involve paradox. Those that do have that effect, I set down as provocatives, when the perception no more manifests one thing than its contrary, alike whether its impact comes from nearby or afar. An illustration will make my meaning plain. Here we say our three fingers, the little finger, the second in the middle. Quite so, he said. Okay. Well, that's basically what that paragraph is sufficient, actually. So if you put up the next to last one. Okay, so somebody can, maybe volunteers again to read this page.
From where? This then?
This then.
This then is just what I was trying to explain a little while ago when I said that some things are provocative of thought and some are not. Defining as provocative things that impinge upon the senses together with their opposites, while those that do not, I said, do not tend to awaken reflection.
Well, now I understand and agree.
To which class then do you think number and the one belong?
I cannot conceive.
Well, reason it out from what has already been said. For if unity is adequately seen by itself or apprehended by some other sensation, it would not tend to draw the mind to the apprehension of essence, as we were explaining in the case of the finger. But if some contradiction is always seen coincidentally with it, so that it no more appears to be one than the opposite, there would forthwith be need of something to judge between them, and it would compel the soul to be at a loss and to inquire, by arousing thought in itself, and to ask whatever then is the one as such. And thus the study of unity will be one of the studies that guide and convert the soul to the contemplation of true being.
But surely the visual perception of it does especially involve this. For we see the same thing at once as one and as an infinite plurality.
Indefinite.
I'm sorry.
Indefinite.
No. Should I reread it? For we see the same thing at once as one and as an indefinite plurality.
Then if this is true of the one, the same holds of all number, does it not?
Of course.
But further, reckoning and the science of arithmetic are wholly concerned with number.
They are, indeed.
And the qualities of number appear to lead to the apprehension of truth.
Beyond anything.
Then, as it seems, these would be among the studies that we are seeking. For a soldier must learn them in order to marshal his troops, and a philosopher because he must rise out of the region of generation and lay hold on essence, or he can never become a true reckoner.
It is so.
And our guardian is soldier and philosopher in one.
Of course.
It is befitting then, Glaucon, that this branch of learning should be prescribed by our law, and that we should induce those who are to share the highest functions of state to enter upon that study of calculation and take hold of it, not as amateurs, but to follow it up until they attain to the contemplation of the nature of number by pure thought, not for the purpose of buying and selling as if they were preparing to be merchants or hucksters, but for the uses of war.
Yeah, I'll finish that. And for facilitating the conversion of the soul itself from the world of generation to essence and truth. Okay. So he's saying that the study of arithmetic, if done in terms, I guess, in terms of the metaphysics of arithmetic. Now, just what would have been in his day, I don't know. Today we would have a lot of things that would be, you know, like Gauss's
right.
dispositions or transform. See, the whole idea, you know, of going from algebraic numbers to transcendental numbers to transfinite numbers. There you have a metaphysics. In fact, he must have had something in mind, but I'm not sure. Otherwise, you wouldn't say this. But I don't know what exactly what it was. Maybe people have some idea.
Well, the one thing that certainly he's in Plato is in the tradition. Well, I would say, you know, he is thinking. Remember, the discovery of irrationals was a big innovation, and the whole relationship of geometry. Because you know, it's funny, geometry and mathematics certainly weren't always conceived of as the same thing, the way that it's somewhat conceived of now. And how he looked at it. Don't forget, this is all 200 years before, or 150 years before Euclid, something like that, 100 years before Euclid. So, you know, I think he's certainly affected by the idea that measurement is not so simple.
Here's something very interesting. He says, pull back a little then, for we just did not rightly select the study that comes next after geometry. What was our mistake? After plane surfaces, we went on to solids and revolution before studying them in themselves. The right way is next in order after the second dimension to take the third. This, I suppose, is the dimension of cubes and of everything that has depth. Why, yes, it is. But this subject, Socrates, does not appear to have been investigated yet. There are two causes of that. First, inasmuch as no city holds them in honor, these inquiries are languidly pursued, owing to their difficulty. And secondly, the investigators need a director who was indispensable for success and who, to begin with, is not easy to find. And if he could be found, as things are now, seekers in this field would be too arrogant to submit to his guidance. But if the state as a whole should join in superintending these studies and honor them, these specialists would accept advice, and continuous and strenuous investigation would bring out the truth. Since even now, lightly esteemed as they are by the multitude, and hampered by the ignorance of their students as to the true reasons for pursuing them, they nevertheless, in the face of all these obstacles, force their way by their inherent charm. And it would not surprise us if the truth about them were made apparent. This reference to the cube, does that ring a bell with anybody?
It's the challenge of how you double the cube.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a state-authored challenge. So somebody took up in seriousness of Plato.
The thing about the plague in Athens.
Yeah.
So, but this is, I don't know if this is antedates those things, but I think it may or may not, I don't know.
Yeah, it predates.
What he's saying here, he's actually prescient then.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's tells you something about Plato, the kind of mind that he had. Okay. So, all right, so then he says, then as our fourth study, he says, let us set down astronomy, assuming that this science, the discussion of which has been passed over, is available provided, that is, that the state pursues it. And then Glaucon says, that is likely, and instead of the vulgar utilitarian commendation of astronomy, for which you just now rebuked me, Socrates, I will now praise it on your principles. For it is obvious to everybody, I think, that this study certainly compels the soul to look upward and leads it away from things here to those higher things. He says, it may be obvious to everybody except me, for I do not think so. What do you think? As it is now handled by those who are trying to lead us up to philosophy, I think it turns the soul's gaze very much downward. You seem to me, in your thoughts, to put a most liberal interpretation on the study of higher things. For apparently if anyone with back-thrown head should learn something by staring at decorations on the ceiling, you would regard him as contemplating them with a higher reason, and not with the eyes. Perhaps you are right, and I am a simpleton. For I, for my part, am unable to suppose that any other study turns the soul's gaze upward than that which deals with being and the invisible. But if anyone tries to learn about the things of sense, whether gaping up or blinking down, I would never say that he really learns. For nothing of the kind admits of true knowledge, nor would I say that his soul looks up, but down, even though he study floating on his back, on sea or land. A fair retort, your rebuke is deserved. But how then did you mean that astronomy ought to be taught, contrary to the present fashion, if it is to be learned in a way that conduces to our purpose? So if you put up the next one.
Can I put in a footnote, quick?
Ernie didn't hear you.
Just go
Okay,
ahead.
can I give you a footnote on that?
Yeah.
Helium cube. This is from Eratosthenes. In his work entitled Platonicus, he relates that when the god proclaimed to the Delians through the oracle that in order to get rid of a plague, they should construct an altar double that of the existing one, their craftsmen fell into great perplexity in their efforts to discover how a solid could be made the double of a similar solid. They therefore went to ask Plato about it, and he replied that the oracle meant not that the god wanted an altar of double the size, but that he wished, in setting them the task, to shame the Greeks for their neglect of mathematics and their contempt of geometry. But he writes the Republic before this. He's forewarning.
That's good.
Well, it also I'm struck an idea that the Brunelleschi dome
Yeah.
was a state-authored challenge
Right.
to get out of the Dark Age. And this question came up on the weekly report, like why is Lynn talking about mathematics and et cetera, in the face of thermonuclear war? Why are you talking about the unpractical? If you're going to deal with the plague, why is it practical to consider doubling a cube? But it's the question of thought. It's the question of moving minds in directions.
Somebody want two people to read this?
Keep going.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Thus, These sparks that paint the sky, since they are decorations on a visible surface, we must regard, to be sure, as the fairest and most exact of material things. But we must recognize that they fall far short of the truth, the movements, namely, of real speed and real slowness in true number, and in all true figures, both in relation to one another and as vehicles of the things they carry and contain. These can be apprehended only by reason and thought, but not by sight. Or do you think otherwise?
By no means.
Then we must use the blazonry of the heavens as patterns to aid in the study of those realities, just as one would do who chanced upon diagrams drawn with special care and elaboration by Daedalus or some other craftsman of nature. For anyone acquainted with geometry who saw such designs would admit the beauty of the workmanship, but would think it absurd to examine them seriously in the expectation of finding in them the absolute truth with regard to equals or doubles or any other ratio.
How could it be otherwise than absurd?
Do you not think that one who was an astronomer in very truth, would feel in the same way when he turned his eyes upon the movements of the stars? He will be willing to concede that the artisan of heaven fashioned it and all that it contains in the best possible manner for such a fabric. But when it comes to the proportions of day and night, and of their relation to the month, and that of the month to the year, and of the other stars to these and one another, do you not suppose that he will regard as a very strange fellow the man who believes that these things go on forever, without change, or the least deviation, though they possess bodies and visible objects, and that this unremitting quest is the realities of these things?
I at least do think so. Now that I hear it from you.
It is by means of problems, then, as in the study of geometry, that we will pursue astronomy too, and we will let be the things in the heavens, if we are to have a part in the true science of astronomy, and so convert to right use from uselessness that natural indwelling intelligence of the soul.
You enjoin a task that will multiply the labor of our present study of astronomy many times.
And I fancy that our other injunctions will be of the same kind if we are of any use as lawgivers. However, what suitable studies have you to suggest?
Nothing thus offhand.
Yet surely, motion in general provides not one, but many forms or species, according to my opinion. To enumerate them all will perhaps be the task of a wise man, but even to us, two of them are apparent.
What are they?
Okay, well then he goes into music. I'll just give you all of that. He says, we may venture to suppose that as the eyes are framed for astronomy, so are the ears framed for the movements of harmony. And these are in some sort kindred sciences, as the Pythagoreans affirm. And we admit, do we not, Glaucon? We do. Then since the task is so great, shall we not inquire of them what their opinion is, and whether they have anything to add? And we in all this will be on the watch for what concerns us. What is that? To prevent our fossilings from attempting to learn anything that does not conduce to the end we have in view, and does not always come out at what we said ought to be the goal of everything, as we were just now saying about astronomy. Or do you not know that they repeat the same procedure in the case of harmonies? They transfer the hearing and measure audible concords and sounds against one another. They're spending much useless labor, just as the astronomers do. Yes, by heaven, and most absurdly too, they talk of something they call minims, and laying their ears alongside as if trying to catch a voice from next door. Some affirm they can hear a note between, and that this is the least interval, and the unit of measurement, while others insist that the strings now render identical sounds, both preferring their ears to their minds. You are speaking of the worthies who vex and torture the strings, and rack them on the pegs, but not to draw out the comparison with strokes of the plectrum and the musician's complaints of too responsive and too reluctant strings. I drop the figure. and tell you that I do not mean these people, but those others whom we just now said we would interrogate about harmony. Their method exactly corresponds to that of the astronomer. For the numbers they seek are those found in these herd concords, but they do not ascend to generalized problems in the consideration which numbers are inherently concordant and which not, and why in each case. So that is his, so on that, do you have anything to say about that, Diane? Do you tell what he's trying to get at about music?
What he's trying to get at.
Yeah, no, not right off. Maybe read it over, you form some idea. Okay.
It's also hard because the music, I mean, the music back then was a little, I mean, Bach was nowhere on the scene,
Yeah.
so.
Margaret, yeah.
Well, it seems he's saying that sound is not of the mind, that just harmonies are not of the mind.
Yeah,
They're just
okay.
sounds.
Heard harmonies are sweet, but unheard are sweeter.
Right.
What's that he says about the minims again? What's that he says about the minims?
You want me to
He says
repeat
they're
it?
listening, yes,
I'll repeat it.
It's like listening for beats when you're tuning two strings.
yeah, when you're tuning two strings,
Yeah.
and they say they prefer their ears to their minds on the issue, and they say that they can hear the minim, this tiniest interval between the two notes.
Okay.
Or on the other hand, they claim that they're exactly the same.
Or they say they're exactly the same, right?
In either
But
case.
it's based on their hearing, rather than an idea.
Rather than the well-tempered system, which is not perfect harmonically.
So Kepler, is that what Kepler's talking about? I think it's harmonies where it says something like you've got this formula for harmonic ratios, but
Yeah.
some of them just don't sound very good. You've got to reject them.
No, I think you'd have to work more on it because, I mean, Kepler's dealing with the whole also conception. But I think Kepler, the point that it's a conception of the mind and not simple numerical ratios or sounds is a consistent point that Plato seems to be making, and certainly Kepler makes. Remember, in Kepler, these things are always adjusting themselves. They're not completely fixed, even though we think of it that way. His whole point is that the system adjusts. In other words, if anything happens to in the system, the whole system changes, not just the one element of the orbit. It all changes as one system, and that's really what you're hearing. So they're constantly adjusting themselves to be in these relationships. Remember, he's taking the extreme. He's taking the minimum and the maximum of the orbits. But these things are in accord to a certain degree throughout the whole orbit. So these things are constantly adjusting themselves.
And they're also adjusted to the other planets.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
It's
They're multiply,
Lynn
yeah.
comments on it.
Yeah.
Kepler's system is multiply connected. It's sort of a forerunner of Riemann's.
They also, I think Bach experimented, I forget who, but they tried having keyboards that have like 48 keys in a scale, you know, if you can imagine. So if you were in different keys, you would use slightly different ones to be able to alter the tuning to have it, as opposed to just what's here.
Well, you can also look at it in a different way, like Kepler concerning the harmony of the spheres, because I mean, that's how Confucius look at it. One of the classic books that don't exist anymore, but you have excerpts on it, is on music, and that Confucius edited. And the whole idea is that the music is the key part to describe harmony, to illustrate harmony. That this is the book of harmony, and because, as you know, Confucius is all regarding a harmonic that the universe is harmonic ordered and it always develops and it never stops developing, and that man's relationship to the universe and man's relationship to the society should reflect that. Music is the key thing that will show the harmonic nature of the universe. I mean, that is in Confucius too. So I think when we talk about music, it doesn't just have to be music, so to speak.
Did Confucius indicate the effect of bad music on the society?
Yeah. And you can see when he talked about it, when it's loud, when it's violent, then you have, when people are, you can see how this society is by the music people perform. There's tons of quotes regarding that. So yeah.
Well, Plato does that, and there was a passage
He's
I
very
saw.
explicit about that.
Yeah. So,
Confucius, yeah.
so they both agree
Yeah.
on that very,
Yeah.
very strongly.
Yeah. I mean, Confucius is like Plato. That was what struck me when I started studying him years and years ago. Was wow, he's not Asian, he's Western, because he was so Western thinking, so to speak. I really think about him as the Plato of the East, so to speak.
Well, I just had something I thought was this question of the forms, that Plato is saying you need the forms to understand, to actually understand understand reality on a true basis. But what I thought was significant was in the Timaeus that the Creator himself seems to be utilizing forms or patterns in his creation. So they're actually necessary for things coming into existence, which is different from just what we just saw with the line there. And he says, first then, in my judgment, we must make a distinction, ask what is that which always is and has no becoming, and what is that which is always becoming and never is? That which is apprehended by intelligence and reason is always in the same state, but that which is conceived by opinion with the help of sensation and without reason is always in a process of becoming and perishing, and never really is. Now everything that becomes or is created must of necessity be created by some cause, for without a cause nothing can be created. The work of the Creator, whenever he looks to the unchangeable and fashions the form and nature of his work, after an unchangeable pattern, must necessarily be made fair and perfect. But when he looks at the created only and uses a created pattern, it is not fair or perfect. So he says, was the heaven then, or the world, whether called by this or by any other more appropriate name, assuming the name, I am asking a question which has to be asked. At the beginning of an inquiry about anything, was the world, I say, always in existence and without beginning, or created and had it a beginning? Created, I reply, being visible and tangible and having a body, and therefore sensible, and all sensible things are apprehended by opinion and sense, and are in a process of creation and created. Now that which is created must, as we affirm, of necessity be created by a cause. But the Father and Maker of all this universe is past finding out. And even if we found him, to tell of him to all men would be impossible. This question, however, we must ask about the world. Which of the patterns had the artificer in mind when he made it? The pattern of the unchangeable, or of that which is created? If the world be indeed fair and the artificer good, it is manifest that he must have looked to that which is eternal. But if what cannot be said without blasphemy is true, then to the created pattern. Everyone will see that he must have looked to the eternal, for the world is the fairest of creations, and he is the best of causes. And having been created in this way, the world has been framed in the likeness of that which is apprehended by reason and mind. It is unchangeable, and it must therefore of necessity, if this is admitted, be a copy of something. Now it is all important that the beginning of everything should be according to nature, and in speaking of the copy, In the original, we may assume that words are akin to the matter which they describe. When they relate to the lasting and permanent and intelligible, the lasting and unalterable, and as far as their nature allows, irrefutable and invincible, nothing less. But when they express only the copy or likeness, and not the eternal things themselves, they need only be likely and analogous to the former words. As being is to becoming, so is truth to belief. As then, Socrates, amidst the many opinions about the gods and the generation of the universe, we are not able to give notions which are altogether and in every respect exact and consistent with one another. Do not be surprised. Enough if we adduce probabilities as likely as any others, for we must remember that I, who am as the speaker, and you who are the judges, are only mortal men, who are to accept the tale which is probable and inquire no further. So that's an ancient idea of things being created based on forms, and it's not taken. It's not considered, because it's not doesn't fit with Newtonian physics. But it's a lot of we have Leibniz, Kusa, Kepler, Riemann, and then most recently the Gurwitch. He described what seemed to me like a form. Next time I'll show the picture of it.
Well, just look at the galaxies. They all have a form. They all have a developing kind of form. They're either spirals or these other funny things, but everything has.
Well, this is the idea that there's an entity, there's some kind of an entity, a form, in the Plato sense, that guides their development. That's what Plato would say.
Is
Like
this
a
have to
future
do with,
state in mind.
does that have to do with forecasting?
Would that have to do with
Forecasting, in other words, that when Lynn says the future really exists,
Yeah.
is it possible also to say forms really exist that guide a future development? I mean, I ask myself, for example, about the form of human society in which mankind is living amongst many nation states that no longer operate on the basis of competition. Think about Prof. Erica saying that the human species will mature, sort of emerge from the womb into out of the confines of the planet. I think we have an advanced idea of that now from what we were talking about with the galaxy, even going back to the Curiosity lander, what Lynn was talking about then. But it seems to me that maybe that is a form of human existence that is sort of there, guiding the development that we're under right now.
You're saying the form sort of pre-exists?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
It's a question I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a reasonable question. It could sort of become active. It could be latent and become active, say, when after conception, let's say, and then the development of the organism would be guided by the form. But you're saying something a little different, I think. The form pre-exists that species even of event. So there's some kind of creativity, you're saying, that leads to that result.
Because it's not, the development, just like the development of an embryo is not, even though the form is predetermined, the actual development onto that form is not predetermined. It can be cut short at any moment.
Well, I also think that you have to think through a little bit. There's more to, because the word form may throw it off a little bit. It's not a formalism. Ultimately, for example, in Plato, ultimately it's the good, and the good is a universal reality that guides all development. So that means that, for example, even if there's a form of, you could say, a standard of, let's say, human development, it exists from the standpoint of the good. And that's you could say is a superseding idea. Because what's important is the development of the good. There's no particular preset structure of human relations or something like that. You know, it really depends. This question comes up in Leibniz in, you know, the best of all possible worlds, which of course is one of these things that people make fun of. And of course Voltaire made fun of. But his point was not that it was all, not even that the imperfection is good because it leads you to closer to perfection, but also that in fact the Creator himself had to choose amongst all the possibilities of creation. That's an interesting point. In a certain sense, what's implied is that there's no creation that's perfect. You can simply presume that the creation that exists is the one that has the greatest potential for human beings to do good.
Yeah, the idea of a form is difficult because you assume that it's like some
standard. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like it will take some shape, right?
A perfect
or
horse.
Yeah, yeah, right. And even with like the development of an embryo, when does the development of an embryo stop? You don't reach an end state, even when you die, especially with like a human being. You don't reach like, okay, we've accomplished our mission. This form has been reached from embryo to infant, and then that's where it stops, right? Or even infant to adult.
Dust.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and then but then even with mankind, it's even more interesting because once it turns to dust, that form is not over because it. And even with animals, you know, their role is not to live; it's to be a singularity in the motion of you know, the abiotic or the biogenic migration of atoms. So they don't even, their form is not ever even fully reached. It's just a constant process of, I guess, the good.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sense in which the good in Plato is a higher, this is the whole point, it's a higher form of development that subsumes the forms of this, or these processes, or whatever you want to call them. So, you know, and I think if you get to, Ernie's going to work on the Parmenides, there's a way in which you have to look at this question of being and becoming, because ultimately in the Parmenides, I think being and becoming become the same thing. And that's where so the being of the universe is creativity, but you can't use it as a word. I think that's why Lynn always says creativity per se. It's creativity in itself, but if that's the real being of the universe, that's a big question to sort of, I think that's a lot closer to the question of forecasting. Lynn thinks in terms of what, if the real substance of the universe is becoming, then what is the direction of that becoming? What are the principles of becoming? Like human history, or, you know, why the Hamiltonian principle? In a sense, the Hamiltonian principle is something that forwards the becoming of the human species. Now, how do you make that work in physics? I don't know. That's another problem we have to deal with.
Okay.
All right, time's up.